The leather whip cracked like thunder against Evangeline's back, and the entire town of Redemption Falls held its breath, all except the stranger in the black duster who stepped from the shadows and changed everything with 5 simple words. "She's my wife now, boys." Dust swirled around the makeshift whipping post in the center of Main Street, where moments before, the crowd had gathered like vultures circling carrion. Sheriff Harlan Briggs stood with his arm raised, ready to deliver another lash to the woman tied before him, her calico dress torn and bloodied. Her young daughter, barely 8 years old, sobbed behind the general store's porch, tiny fists pressed against her eyes. Evangeline Morrison had committed the unforgivable sin of stealing bread. Not for herself, never for herself, but for little Lucy, whose ribs showed through her nightgown like prison bars. 3 days without food would drive any mother to desperate measures. But in Redemption Falls, desperation was a luxury the poor couldn't afford. The stranger's voice carried across the square with the authority of rolling thunder. Every head turned toward the saloon's batwing doors, where a figure emerged from the amber light within. Tall as a lodgepole pine and twice as steady, he wore his hat low over eyes the color of winter storms. His boots struck the wooden boardwalk with deliberate precision. Click, 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 each step echoing like a countdown to judgment. I said. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow reached every ear. "She's my wife." Sheriff Briggs lowered the whip, sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill. "Now hold on there, mister. Don't know who you think you are, but name's Gabriel Stone." The stranger's hand rested easy on the pearl handle of his Colt .45. "And I'm claiming what's mine." You could have heard a pin drop in that dusty square. Evangeline raised her head, auburn hair matted with sweat and tears, green eyes wide with confusion and something that might have been hope. She'd never seen this man before in her life, yet something in his steady gaze made her heart skip like a stone across still water. Gabriel Stone. Even little Lucy knew that name, whispered in the same breath as legends. They said he'd ridden with the Rangers down in Texas, that he could shoot the wings off a fly at 50 paces, that he'd once tracked 3 murderers across the Badlands for 6 months straight. They also said he'd disappeared after his pregnant wife died in a Comanche raid, vanishing into the wilderness like smoke. But here he stood, solid as granite and twice as unmoving. "Your wife." Sheriff Briggs sputtered, his face reddening like a turkey's wattle. "Gabriel Stone, you lying son of a." This here's Evangeline Morrison, widow woman. Been living in that shack by the creek for nigh on 2 years. Morrison was her maiden name. Gabriel's boots hit the dirt as he stepped down from the boardwalk. "We married quiet like, down in San Antonio. Private ceremony." His eyes never left Evangeline's face. "Ain't that right, darlin'?" The question hung in the air like morning mist. Evangeline stared at this stranger, this legend made flesh, who'd materialized from nowhere to claim her as his own. Her mind raced through possibilities like tumbleweeds in a twister. She could deny it, tell the truth, take her lashes, and hope she survived. Or she could trust this man with winter storm eyes, who'd step between her and certain death. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, that's right." The crowd began to murmur like distant thunder. Old Mrs. Patterson clutched her shawl tighter. Jake Wilson, who ran the livery stable, spat tobacco juice in the dirt and shook his head. They all knew Evangeline Morrison, the quiet widow who took in washing, who never asked for charity, who'd rather starve than beg. The woman who'd buried her husband Jacob 2 winters back when the consumption took him, leaving her with nothing but a ramshackle cabin and a child to feed. Sheriff Briggs's hand twitched toward his gun, but Gabriel Stone's reputation preceded him like his shadow. "Even if that were true," Briggs said through gritted teeth, "don't change the fact she stole from Carmichael's store." "How much?" Gabriel's question cut through the tension. 3 loaves of bread and some salt pork. $20, plus damages for the lock she broke. $5 should cover it. Gabriel reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a gold piece that caught the afternoon sun like a fallen star. In compensation for the good sheriff's time, he flipped the coin with his thumb. It spun through the air, a golden blur against the pewter sky, before landing in the dust at Briggs's feet with a soft thud. The sheriff stared at it like it might bite him. "Well, Gabriel's voice carried the patient menace of a rattlesnake's warning. My wife's been through enough for one day. Briggs bent to retrieve the coin, his movements jerky as a marionette's. I suppose, if you're taking responsibility for her, I am. Gabriel stepped to the whipping post and began untying the ropes that bound Evangeline's wrists. His fingers worked with surprising gentleness, and when the hemp fell away, he caught her as her knees buckled. Easy now, he murmured against her ear. I've got you. His arms felt like sanctuary. Evangeline had forgotten what it meant to lean on someone stronger than herself, to feel protected instead of always protecting. For just a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, but as Gabriel helped her stand, she caught sight of Sheriff Briggs's face, twisted with something darker than embarrassment. The man had been humiliated in front of the entire town, made to look weak by a stranger's gold and reputation. In her experience, men like Harlan Briggs didn't forget such slights. They got even. Mama. Lucy's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. The little girl broke free from her hiding place and ran toward them, braids flying behind her like streamers in the wind. But as she reached for Evangeline's outstretched arms, something in the crowd shifted, a collective intake of breath that spoke of danger. What had she just agreed to? And what price would this mysterious savior expect in return? The silence that followed Lucy's cry stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the creak of Gabriel's leather duster as he knelt to catch the little girl. She hesitated for a heartbeat, this stranger with his weathered face and gentle hands, before launching herself into his arms with the faith only children possess. You saved my mama, Lucy whispered against his shoulder, her small voice muffled by emotion. Gabriel's throat worked as he swallowed hard. That I did, little sparrow. The endearment fell from his lips like he'd used it 1,000 times before. When he looked up at Evangeline, she saw something raw and unguarded flicker across his features, a grief so deep it had carved permanent lines around his eyes. Sheriff Briggs cleared his throat with deliberate loudness. Well then, Stone, since you're claiming her as kin, I expect you'll be keeping her in line from now on. His tone carried an unmistakable threat. Wouldn't want any more misunderstandings. There won't be. Gabriel stood slowly, Lucy still, clinging to his neck like a burr. We'll be heading out come morning. Got business down in Santa Fe. Is that so? Briggs's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Funny thing about business. Sometimes it has a way of following a man wherever he goes. The crowd began to disperse, their appetite for spectacle satisfied, but their hunger for gossip just beginning. Evangeline could already hear the whispers starting. How convenient that Gabriel Stone had appeared just when she needed saving. How suspicious that no one had ever heard mention of a wife. By sunset, half the town would be convinced she was his mistress, and the other half would be planning ways to prove it. Come on, Gabriel said quietly, his hand finding the small of her back. Let's get you home. The walk to her cabin felt like a mile instead of a few hundred yards. Every step jarred the wounds on her back where the whip had found its mark. Gabriel seemed to sense her struggle. His pace slowed to match hers, and twice he offered his arm when she stumbled. Lucy skipped between them, chattering about everything and nothing with the resilience of youth. Are you really married to Mama? She asked as they reached the sagging porch of the Morrison cabin, Gabriel's hand stilled on the door latch. What do you think, little sparrow? Lucy studied him with the serious expression children wore when weighing important matters. I think, she said finally, that you're the kind of man who tells the truth, even when it's hard. Smart girl. He ruffled her hair and pushed open the door. The cabin's interior told the story of genteel poverty. Furniture that had once been fine, but now showed the wear of hard use. Curtains mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible. A stone hearth that provided more hope than heat. But it was clean, every surface scrubbed until it gleamed, and wildflowers from the creek bank brightened the windowsills with splashes of color. Gabriel's eyes took in every detail. The empty pantry shelves, the thin quilts on the narrow beds, the way Evangeline moved carefully to hide her pain. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd expected from a man of his reputation. You've made a fine home here. It's not much. Evangeline busied herself lighting the oil lamp, her hands shaking slightly. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the reality of her situation was settling in like morning fog. She was alone with a stranger, a dangerous stranger. if the stories were true, who'd claimed her as his wife in front of the entire town. But it's ours. Mama, I'm hungry, Lucy said, her earlier excitement fading as exhaustion took hold. The simple statement hit Evangeline like a physical blow. Her daughter was hungry, had been hungry for days, and she had nothing to offer except empty promises and thinner soup. The bread she'd stolen was long gone, probably fed to Carmichael's pigs by now. Gabriel must have seen something in her face because he reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a wrapped bundle. Happened to pick up supplies before I came looking. For you, he said casually, as if searching for a wife he'd never met was an everyday occurrence. Salt pork, beans, cornmeal, even some peppermint sticks for little sparrows who've been brave. Lucy's eyes went wide as saucers. Real peppermint, red and white striped, sweet as Christmas morning. He handed her one of the candy sticks, and she clutched it like treasure. Evangeline stared at the bundle of food, more than she'd seen in weeks, and felt her throat close up. We can't accept charity. Good thing it's not charity. Gabriel's tone was matter-of-fact. A man's got a right to feed his family. But we're not. In the eyes of everyone in Redemption Falls, we are. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage, and something uniquely masculine. Question is, what do we do about it? The weight of his gaze made her pulse quicken. What do you mean? I mean, Mrs. Stone, that you've got yourself a reputation now. And in a town like this, reputation is everything. He gestured toward the window, where the last light of day painted the mountains purple. By morning, everyone from here to Denver will know that Gabriel Stone claimed Evangeline Morrison as his wife. That makes you either the luckiest woman in the territory or the biggest fool. Which do you think I am? That remains to be seen. The honesty in his answer should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a strange thrill through her chest. When was the last time a man had spoken to her without condescension or pity? When had anyone looked at her like she was capable of making her own choices, even dangerous ones? Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why did you help me? Gabriel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. Had a wife once. Mary Catherine. She was about your size, with hair the color of autumn leaves. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where a locket might rest beneath his shirt. Lost her and our unborn child 3 years back. Comanche raid while I was away on ranger business. Evangeline's heart clenched. I'm sorry. Been running from that grief ever since. Figured maybe it was time to stop running towards something instead. He looked at Lucy, who had fallen asleep in the rocking chair, peppermint stick still clutched in her small fist. She needs a father. You need protection. And I need a reason to stay in one place long enough to remember what it feels like to be human again. That's a cold proposition, Mr. Stone. Gabriel. And cold propositions sometimes grow warm, given time and care. There was something in his voice, not quite hope, but the possibility of it, that made her chest tight. What exactly are you suggesting? Make it real. He turned to face her fully, and she saw the scars that marked his hands, the lines that spoke of hard living and harder choices. A marriage of convenience, if you will. I give you my name and protection. You give me a home and a family to defend. No promises beyond that, no expectations of intimacy. Just two people helping each other survive. The word intimacy hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Evangeline found herself studying his mouth, wondering what it would feel like to be kissed by a man who'd forgotten how to be gentle until a child called him back to himself. And if I say no, then I'll escort you and Lucy to the next town over, set you up with enough money to make a fresh start, and ride out of your life like I was never here. Just like that. Just like that. She believed him. More than that, she trusted him. This stranger who'd materialized from legend to save her from a whip's bite. But trust was a luxury she'd learned to question. I need time to think. Of course you do. Gabriel moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I treat you with respect. Both of you. Whatever else I am, I'm not a man who forces himself on women or frightens children. After he left, Evangeline sat in the gathering darkness and tried to make sense of the day's events. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of evening. Horses nickering in the distance, dogs barking, the faint music from the saloon. But underneath, It all was something else, something that made the hair on her arms stand up, the sound of men talking in low voices. Planning. She crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. Three figures stood in the shadow of the old oak tree. Sheriff Briggs and two of his deputies, their faces hidden but their postures unmistakably threatening. "Won't stand for it," Briggs was saying. "Some gunslinger rides into my town and makes me look like a fool. What you want us to do, Sheriff?" "Watch them. Both of them. Stone's got a reputation, but every man's got weaknesses. And that woman." His voice dropped too low to hear, but his meaning was clear. They were planning something. Something that would put Gabriel, and by extension, her and Lucy, in danger. What had she gotten them all into? And was a marriage of convenience worth the price they might all have to pay? Dawn broke over Redemption Falls like a promise half-kept, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold while shadows still clung to the valley floor. Evangeline hadn't slept. How could she, with Sheriff Briggs's threats echoing in her mind and Gabriel Stone's proposition weighing on her heart like a stone? She was mixing cornmeal for breakfast when the knock came. Soft, respectful, nothing like the demanding pounds she'd grown accustomed to from bill collectors and town officials. Through the window, she saw Gabriel standing on her porch, hat in hand, looking for all the world like a suitor come calling instead of a legend wrapped in leather and gunpowder. "Morning," he said when she opened the door. "Sleep well?" The question was innocent enough, but something in his eyes told her he knew better. This was a man who'd spent years reading danger in the set of shoulders, the tilt of a head, the way someone held their hands. He'd probably spotted Briggs's midnight gathering from wherever he'd bedded down. Well enough. She stepped aside to let him enter. "Coffee. Much obliged." Lucy bounced down from the loft, her nightgown trailing behind her like a banner. "Gabriel, are you staying for breakfast?" "Mama's making Johnny cakes. If your mama doesn't mind the company." He accepted the tin cup of coffee Evangeline offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. His hands were warm, calloused from years of hard work and harder living. "We need to talk." "Lucy, go gather the eggs," Evangeline said quietly. "But, Mama, now, sweetheart." The little girl's face fell, but she obeyed, grabbing the wicker basket from beside the door. Gabriel waited until her footsteps faded before speaking. "They came by last night. 3 of them, circling like wolves." Evangeline's hands stilled on the skillet. "I saw them talking by the oak tree. Saw more than that, I'd wager." His voice was grim. "Briggs isn't the type to let a slight go unanswered. He's got something planned." "What kind of something?" Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it held answers to questions he didn't want to ask. "The kind that ends with you and Lucy on the next stage out of town, and me face down in the street." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known there would be consequences for accepting Gabriel's protection, but she'd hoped, foolishly, perhaps, that his reputation would be enough to keep them safe. "So what do? We make it real." He looked up, and she saw steal in his winter storm eyes. "Today, this morning, before Briggs can cook up whatever scheme he's hatching. A real marriage." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Real as we can make it on short notice." Gabriel stood, moving to the window to peer through the curtains. "There's a circuit preacher comes through town every few weeks. Name's Reverend Hoskins. He's staying at the boarding house. I checked." Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs. "Gabriel, I know it's asking a lot." He turned back to her, and for a moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked. "God knows I never thought I'd be standing in another woman's kitchen talking about vows and promises. But Mary Catherine's been gone 3 years, and you're here now, and Lucy." He swallowed hard. "Lucy deserves better than running from town to town, always looking over her shoulder. She's not your responsibility, isn't she?" The question hung between them like morning mist. "Moment I claimed you as my wife, she became my daughter in the eyes of the law, and I don't abandon family." The simple declaration sent warmth spiraling through her chest. How long had it been since someone had claimed her? Since someone had looked at her and Lucy and seen something worth protecting instead of a burden to be endured? What about love? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Gabriel's expression softened. "Love's a luxury, Evangeline. Survival's a necessity." "But," he paused, seeming to weigh his words, "I've seen marriages built unless that grew into something beautiful. Respect, trust, shared purpose, those are good foundations. And if they're not enough, then we'll face that when we come to it. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his eyes. But right now, I'm asking you to trust me, to let me keep you and Lucy safe. Before she could answer, the door burst open and Lucy tumbled in, basket clutched to her chest and eyes wide with excitement. Mama, there's a man with a collar talking to Mrs. Patterson about a wedding. Gabriel and Evangeline exchanged glances. What kind of man, sweetheart? Evangeline asked. A preacher man. He's got a big black book and everything. Lucy sat down the basket and grabbed Gabriel's hand. Are you and Mama really getting married? Gabriel knelt to her level, his voice gentle. Would you like that, little sparrow? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Then you could be my papa, and we could be a real family, and nobody would ever hurt Mama again. The faith in her voice was like a knife to Evangeline's heart. Lucy had been so young when Jacob died, too young to remember having a father's protection. But she was old enough now to understand what they'd been missing. Then I guess we better go find that preacher, Gabriel said, rising to his feet. An hour later, they stood in the boarding house parlor while Reverend Hoskins, a thin, earnest man with kind eyes and gentle hands, performed the ceremony that would bind their lives together. Mrs. Patterson served as witness, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief and muttering about true love finding a way. If only she knew the truth. Gabriel had cleaned up for the occasion, trading his dusty duster for a black suit coat that stretched across his broad shoulders. His hair was combed back, still damp from washing, and he'd shaved the stubble from his jaw. He looked like a different man, still dangerous, but refined. Civilized. Evangeline wore her one good dress, the blue calico she'd saved for special occasions that never seemed to come. Lucy had braided wildflowers into her hair, and for a moment, standing there in the morning light, she almost felt like a real bride. Do you, Gabriel Stone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? Gabriel's voice was steady as granite. I do, and do. You, Evangeline Morrison, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part. The words stuck in her throat for a moment. This was it, the point of no return. Once she said those words, there would be no going back to the life she'd known, no matter how uncertain that life had been. But Gabriel's hand was warm and steady in hers, and Lucy was beaming up at them like they'd just handed her the moon and stars. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Hoskins smiled broadly. You may kiss your bride. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Gabriel's eyes searched hers, asking permission, and she found herself nodding slightly. His kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a whisper of promise against her lips that left her breathless and aching for more. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Stone, the Reverend said, beaming. May God bless your union with happiness and prosperity. They were walking back toward the cabin, Lucy skipping ahead with her handful of wildflowers, when Gabriel suddenly stopped. His hand went to his gun, and every line of his body went taut with tension. What is it? Evangeline whispered. Smoke. He pointed toward the creek, where a thin column of black smoke was rising against the morning sky. Coming from your place. They ran then, Gabriel's long strides eating up the ground, while Evangeline lifted her skirts and tried to keep pace. But even before they crested the hill, she knew what they'd find. The cabin was burning. Not just burning, destroyed. The roof had already collapsed, and flames licked hungrily at what remained of the walls. Everything she owned, every memory she'd built with Jacob, every small comfort she'd managed to provide for Lucy, all of it was ash and ember. No, the word tore from her throat like a wounded animal's cry. No, no, no. Gabriel's arm came around her waist, holding her back from the flames. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm so damn sorry. Our home, Lucy whispered, tears streaming down her face. Our home is gone. Sheriff Briggs chose that moment to appear, riding up with 2 deputies in tow. His expression was properly somber, But there was something else there, satisfaction. Maybe, or grim pleasure. Terrible thing, he said, dismounting. House fires are always a tragedy. Lucky thing you folks weren't inside. Lucky, Gabriel repeated, his voice flat as hammered steel. Course, these old cabins. Briggs shook his head sadly. Dry wood, faulty chimneys. Could happen to anyone. Could, Gabriel agreed. Or it could happen to specific people. People who've made certain enemies. The two men stared at each other. Across the smoldering ruins, and Evangeline realized with crystal clarity that this was no accident. This was Briggs's answer to being humiliated in front of the town. Burn them out, destroy any refuge they might have found, force them to leave Redemption Falls with nothing but the clothes on their backs. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation that he'd just given Gabriel Stone a reason to stay and fight. The ashes of Evangeline's life were still smoldering when Gabriel Stone made his decision. He stood in the ruins of what had been a home, Lucy's small hand clutched in his left while his right rested on the grip of his Colt, and felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Pack what you can salvage, he told Evangeline quietly. We're leaving. Leaving? Sheriff Briggs's voice carried false concern. Now that's a shame, Stone. Just when you were becoming part of our little community. Gabriel's eyes never left. The smoking timbers. Funny thing about communities, Sheriff. They tend to protect their own. This doesn't feel much like protection. Accidents happen, so do reckonings. Gabriel turned then, and Briggs took an involuntary step backward. The man who'd claimed Evangeline in the town square had been controlled, careful. The man who stood among the ashes of her burned home was something else entirely, a predator whose prey had just revealed itself. You made this personal, Briggs. That was your mistake. You threatening me, Stone. I'm educating you. Gabriel's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. See, you thought you were dealing with a drifter. Someone who'd take his woman and run rather than face trouble. But you burned down my wife's home. You made my daughter cry. He gestured to Lucy, who stood pale and trembling beside the ruins. And now I'm going to teach you the difference between a man passing through and a man protecting his family. The silence stretched taut as a hangman's rope. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way the moment would break. The law, Briggs began. You are the law here, Gabriel interrupted. Which means I'll have to be something else. He turned away from the sheriff then, dismissing him like he would a bothersome child. But Evangeline saw the way his shoulders remained rigid, the careful positioning that kept his gun hand free. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Mama, Lucy whispered, tugging on Evangeline's skirt. I found something. She held up a small wooden box, its surface scorched but intact. Evangeline's breath caught as she recognized it. Jacob's memory box, where she'd kept his letters, their wedding ring, and the few photographs they'd managed to afford. Somehow, impossibly, it had survived the fire. It was under the floorboard where you hid it, Lucy explained. The fire didn't reach that far. Gabriel examined the box with careful hands. Built to last, he murmured. Your husband was a craftsman. He was a dreamer, Evangeline corrected softly. Said he'd build us a proper house someday, with glass windows and a stone foundation. Make us a fortune in cattle ranching. She touched the box's scorched surface. He died before the dream could come true. Dreams don't die, Gabriel said, surprising her. They just wait for the right person to pick them up. Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider was coming hard from the direction of town. Young Billy Hutchins from the telegraph office, his horse lathered with sweat and his face flushed with excitement. Sheriff, Billy called out, reining in his mount. Got a wire from Santa Fe? Federal marshals coming through, investigating reports of. He glanced nervously at Gabriel. Of irregularities in local law enforcement. Briggs's face went white, then red, then white again. When? Day after tomorrow, sir. Marshal Cade Thornton. Evangeline felt Gabriel stiffen beside her. You know him? She asked quietly. We've met. Gabriel's tone was carefully neutral, but she caught the tension underneath. Good man. Honest. The kind who doesn't take bribes or look the other way when badges get used for personal vendettas. Is that good or bad for us? Depends on whether we're still alive when he gets here. The words sent ice through her veins. She'd thought the worst was over, that Briggs had played his hand with the fire and would now back down. But Gabriel's expression told a different story. The sheriff wasn't retreating, he was escalating. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Gabriel continued. "Both of you." "Where?" Evangeline gestured to the ruins around them. "This was all we had. The boarding house. Mrs. Patterson won't take us in. Not after this." Evangeline's voice was flat with certainty. "The whole town's too scared of Briggs to cross him openly." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon like he was reading signs in the landscape. "There's a place," he said finally. "Old line shack up in the hills, about 5 miles north. Used to be part of the Rockingham spread before the owner died. It's rough, but it's shelter. And isolated," Evangeline added, understanding the implication. "If something happens to you, nothing's going to happen to me." But his tone lacked conviction. "I need you to trust me, Evangeline. Can you do that?" She looked at this man who'd claimed her, married her, and was now preparing to face down an entire corrupt system for her sake. 3 days ago, she'd never seen his face. Now he was asking her to trust him with her life and Lucy's. "Yes," she said simply. They loaded what little they could salvage into Gabriel's saddlebags, the memory box, a few clothes, some food. The rest would have to stay with the ashes. As they prepared to leave, Gabriel pulled her aside. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "About Marshall Thornton." "What about him?" "He's not just coming to investigate Briggs. He's coming for me." Evangeline's heart stopped. "What?" "There's a warrant out. Federal warrant. For a bank robbery in Tucson 3 months ago. 3 men hit the First National, killed a teller and a customer. One of them looked like me. Same height, same build, same horse." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I was 200 miles away at the time, but that doesn't matter. Witness identified me from a wanted poster." "Are you saying you're innocent?" "I'm saying I didn't rob that bank. But I've done other things, Evangeline. Things that would make you think twice about trusting me with your daughter's safety." The confession hung between them like a loaded gun. Evangeline studied his face, looking for deception, for the kind of casual cruelty she'd learned to recognize in desperate men. Instead, she saw guilt, regret, and something that might have been hope. "What kind of things?" "Killed men who needed killing. Taken money from those who had too much and gave it to those who had too little. Bent the law when it suited me and broken it when it didn't." He met her eyes steadily. "I'm not a good man, Evangeline, but I'm trying to be better. Because of us. Because of you. Because of Lucy. Because somewhere in all this mess, I found something worth being better for." The raw honesty in his voice stole her breath. How many men would have revealed such damaging truths when they could have simply run? How many would have chosen confession over deception, even when it meant losing everything? "We should go," she said finally. "You're not going to ask me to leave? To disappear before I bring more trouble down on your head? Are you going to?" Gabriel's smile was sad and beautiful. "No, ma'am. I'm going to see this through." The line shack was everything Gabriel had promised. Rough, isolated, and barely standing. But it had 4 walls, a roof that mostly kept out the weather, and a stone fireplace that would provide warmth when the mountain nights turned cold. More importantly, it was defensible, with clear sight lines in all directions and only one approach that wouldn't be visible from miles away. They spent the afternoon making it habitable, Gabriel repairing the worst of the damage while Evangeline and Lucy cleaned and organized. It was strange, domestic work that felt both foreign and familiar. Like playing house with deadly serious stakes as evening approached, Gabriel grew increasingly restless. He checked his weapons, cleaned his rifle, and kept glancing toward the trail that led back to town. Finally, he announced his intention to scout the area. "You're not going back to town," Evangeline said. It wasn't a question. "Have to. Need to know what Briggs is planning. And if it's a trap?" Gabriel's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Then I'll spring it on my terms instead of his." He was preparing to leave when Lucy appeared at his elbow, her small face serious with concentration. "I made you something," she said, holding out her hand. In her palm lay a small cross, woven from grass and wildflowers. It was clumsy, childish work, but created with obvious love and care. "It's for protection," she explained solemnly. "Mama says prayers and crosses keep bad things away." Gabriel knelt and allowed her to pin the makeshift talisman to his shirt. "Thank you, little sparrow. I'll keep it close. Promise you'll come back." The question hung in the air like a prayer. Gabriel's throat worked as he swallowed hard. I promised to try. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It's not. But it's the best I can give you. He kissed Lucy's forehead, then turned to Evangeline. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and she saw in his eyes all the words he couldn't say: apologies, promises, hopes, and fears. If I don't come back, you will. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. You have to, because Lucy needs her father, and I. She paused, the words catching in her throat. I need my husband. Gabriel's hands framed her face, his thumbs tracing the sharp line of her cheekbones. Evangeline, come back to us, Gabriel. Whatever happens down there, whatever you have to do, just come back. He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, like a man drinking from a well in the desert. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I will, he said against her lips. I swear it. He mounted his horse and rode into the gathering darkness, leaving Evangeline and Lucy alone in the mountain wilderness. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Evangeline pulled her daughter close and began to pray that I in the distance. The first gunshot of the night echoed across the valley like thunder. The gunshot that echoed across the valley was followed by silence so complete that Evangeline could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She stood at the lined shack's single window, Lucy pressed against her side, both of them staring into the darkness where Gabriel had disappeared. Was that Papa? Lucy whispered. I don't know, sweetheart. Evangeline's voice was steadier than she felt. But we're going to wait right here like he told us to. The minutes crawled by like wounded animals. Every sound, wind through the pines, an owl's cry, the distant yip of coyotes, made her jump. She'd loaded Jacob's old shotgun and placed it within reach, but her hands shook every time she touched the stock. She was a seamstress, not a gunfighter. What good would she be if trouble came calling? Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by the rapid thunder of hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast. Evangeline's blood turned to ice water. Mama, Lucy breathed. Someone's coming. Through the window, Evangeline could see torches flickering in the distance. 3, maybe 4 riders moving up the mountain trail. They rode with purpose, not the casual gait of travelers. And something about their formation spoke of predators closing in on cornered prey. Get under the bed, she told Lucy urgently. Now, what about Papa? Papa will find us. She hoped it was true. Go on, little sparrow. Hide until I tell you it's safe. Lucy scrambled beneath the crude rope bed, while Evangeline checked the shotgun's load with trembling fingers. 2 shells. If more than 2 men came through that door, the hoofbeat stopped. Just outside the shack, Evangeline held her breath, listening to the soft creak of leather as men dismounted, the jingle of spurs on stone. Then, Sheriff Briggs's voice cut through the night like a blade. Mrs. Stone, I know you're in there. Come on out, and we can settle this civilized-like. Evangeline said nothing, keeping the shotgun trained on the door. Your husband's dead, Briggs continued, his tone mockingly sympathetic. Shot while resisting. Arrest. Federal warrant, you understand. Had to do my duty. A pause. Course, that leaves you and the little girl without protection. Dangerous thing, being alone on the mountain. You're lying. The words tore from her throat before she could stop them. Am I? Ask yourself. If Gabriel Stone was still breathing, would he let me ride up here unmolested? Would he let me stand outside his door, talking to his wife? Briggs chuckled, a sound like breaking glass. Face facts, woman. Your knight in shining armor is buzzard meat. The words hit her like physical blows, but underneath the pain was something else. Anger, pure and burning bright. This man had terrorized her, burned her home, and now he claimed to have murdered her husband. Whether Gabriel was truly dead or not, Briggs deserved to pay for his crimes. What do you want? She called out. Justice, Briggs replied. Stone killed 2 of my deputies before we got him. That makes you an accessory. Lucky for you. I'm willing to be reasonable. Come out peaceful, and I'll make sure you and the girl get a fair trial. Fair trial from Harlan Briggs would mean a rope around her neck and Lucy sent to an orphanage, if they were fortunate. More likely, they'd both disappear into the wilderness, another tragic accident for the territorial reports. I need time to think, Evangeline called back. Don't have time. Federal marshals due tomorrow, and I need this mess cleaned up before he arrives. Briggs's patience was clearly wearing thin. You've got 30 seconds to come out, or we're coming in. Evangeline glanced toward the bed where Lucy was hidden, then back at the door. 2 shells. For men, maybe more. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple, but sometimes mathematics lied. 20 seconds. Briggs warned. That's when Evangeline heard it. A sound so soft she almost missed it. The whisper of boot leather on wood, coming from the back wall of the shack. Someone was climbing onto the roof. 10 seconds. A board creaked overhead. Whoever was up there was moving carefully, trying to stay quiet. One of Briggs's men, probably, planning to drop through the roof while she was focused on the door. Time's up, Mrs. Stone. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and dust. Briggs came through first, gun drawn, followed by 2 deputies she recognized from town. But before any of them could take more than a step, the entire world seemed to catch fire. Gabriel Stone dropped through the roof like an avenging angel, landing behind the intruders with both Colts blazing. The first deputy went down before he could clear leather. The second managed to get his gun out, but not aimed before Gabriel's bullet took him in the chest. Briggs spun toward this new threat, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. You're supposed to be dead. Funny thing about dying, Gabriel said, his voice cold as winter wind. It's harder than it looks. They faced each other across the small room. The corrupt sheriff and the legendary gunfighter, everything that had brought them to this moment crystallized into a single, deadly instant. Evangeline could see it in their eyes, the knowledge that only one of them would walk away. Fast as they say you are, Briggs asked, his hand hovering over his gun. Faster. The draw happened so quickly that Evangeline's eyes couldn't follow it. One moment both men were still as statues. The next Gabriel's Colt was smoking and Briggs was staggering backward, a spreading red stain across his chest. That's for burning down my wife's home, Gabriel said quietly. Briggs fell to his knees, then toppled forward onto the rough plank floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Papa! Lucy burst from her hiding place and launched herself into Gabriel's arms. I knew you'd come back. I knew it. Gabriel holstered his guns and caught her, holding her tight against his chest. Over her head, his eyes found Evangeline's, and she saw exhaustion there, and pain, but also something that looked like peace. How? Evangeline asked. Briggs said you were dead. He said he killed you. Killed someone, Gabriel replied grimly. One of his own men, turned out. Fellow named Henderson who'd been skimming from the town treasury. Briggs shot him in the back, then told the others it was me. His jaw tightened. When I found Henderson's body, I figured it was time to stop running and start hunting. The other shots we heard. 2 more deputies, hidden in the rocks below. They won't be bothering anyone again. Gabriel set Lucy down gently, then moved. To Evangeline. I'm sorry you had to see this. Sorry it came to killing. Don't apologize for protecting your family, she said firmly. That's what good men do. Gabriel's smile was soft as sunrise. First time anyone's called me a good man in years. Get used to it. Evangeline stepped into his arms, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Because that's what you are. What you've always been, underneath everything else. They were still holding each other when the sound of approaching horses reached them. Gabriel tensed, his hand moving toward his gun, but Evangeline caught his wrist. Wait, she said. Listen. These hoofbeats were different, measured, official, accompanied by the jingle of harness and the creak of wagon wheels. A voice called out from the darkness, authoritative but not threatening. Marshal Cade Thornton, Territorial Law. Anyone in there hurt? Gabriel closed his eyes briefly, then called back. We're all right, Marshal. Come on up. The man who entered. The shack was everything Evangeline had expected from Gabriel's description. Tall, weathered, with eyes that missed nothing and a badge that gleamed silver in the lamplight. He took in the scene with professional detachment, noting the bodies, the weapons, the frightened child clinging to her father's leg. Gabriel Stone, he said simply. Marshal. Gabriel's voice was carefully neutral. Been looking for you. I figured. Thornton studied him for a long moment, then surprised them all by holstering his weapon. Funny thing happened on my way up here. Stopped in town, talked to some folks. Seems Sheriff Briggs and his boys were mixed up in all kinds of unsavory business. Extortion, theft, murder. His gaze shifted to the dead sheriff. Real shame what happened to him. Heard tell he was shot while trying to kill an innocent family. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. That how you heard it? That's how Mrs. Patterson told it. Reverend Hoskins, too. Even young Billy Hutchins had some interesting stories about telegrams that never got sent and evidence that went missing. Thornton smiled grimly. Amazing how talkative folks get when they're not afraid anymore. What about the warrant? Funny thing about that, too. Real bank robber got himself caught in El Paso 2 days ago. Confessed to the whole thing. Cleared. Your name entirely. Thornton tipped his hat to Evangeline. Congratulations on your marriage, ma'am. Hope you'll be very happy. 3 months later, Evangeline Stone stood in the doorway of their new home. A real house this time, with glass windows and a stone foundation, built on the land Gabriel had purchased with the reward money from capturing Briggs's gang. The morning sun painted the valley in shades of gold and green, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear Lucy's laughter as she played with the barn kittens. Gabriel emerged from the stable, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair mussed. From work. He'd put on weight since the troubles, filled out in a way that spoke of regular meals and peaceful sleep. The haunted look had faded from his eyes, replaced by something that might have been contentment. "Morning, Mrs. Stone," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Morning, Mr. Stone." She went willingly, still marveling at the ease of it, the rightness. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had grown into something deeper, warmer, more real than any fairy tale. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he'd posed that first morning in her burned cabin. Evangeline looked out at their valley, their home, their life built from ashes and hope. "Only one," she said. Gabriel's face fell. "What's that?" "That I didn't steal that bread sooner." His laughter filled the morning air like music, and somewhere in the garden, the roses Jacob had planted years ago finally began to bloom. Folk always say love can't grow from desperation, but sometimes the deepest roots take hold in the darkest soil. If this tale warmed your heart like a campfire on a cold night, show your appreciation with a like and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and let us know what corner of this wide world you're calling home.